anybody comes in to eat it. So
And get well, you'll see some data today. Odyssey, are they contracting Odyssey in Michigan for spring barley?
Yeah, it's a top choice for spring
Yeah.
2 rows.
Yeah, I was surprised when I went through the data. I went, oh, and it's in my data, well, it's your data. I mean, when I was looking at it, that was the one that was coming out. It was the best. Good sprout resistance, pretty, it's okay yield. Not at the bottom, but it's in the top 5.
Yeah, every year when I look at the trial data, I've always got my eye out for something that could be a better candidate, and I haven't really found one.
Yeah, if you can get your hands on some LCS Odyssey.
I'll talk to Carl too, get some Wisconsin advice.
You can get some Odyssey out of Bickert Seeds down by Platteville. We've had terrible results with Odyssey and Genie, and
they don't work for us.
No, I think our yield last year was 20 bushel and plot average was 90. They didn't get powdery. We had no powdery mildew last year, but they get everything else.
That's what surprised me so much when Odyssey was coming out on top of the Michigan trials at all 3 sites, or towards the top. It's like, wow, it does work somewhere, which is good,
Oh yeah, I had 6 acres of barley, which by mid-October were totally consumed by the deer. The deer just thought it was candy. Of course, all the sandhill cranes, there were flocks of those. They kind of contributed, and I was a little disappointed because by mid-October there wasn't much grain for the pheasants. They want elsewhere. I'm going to try to grow a little additional. I'm having fun with it.
Yeah, I've heard Odyssey does really poorly in New York too, so I think we must be the outlier where it works well for us.
Yeah, I haven't analyzed the data from them yet this year. And yeah, in Maine and Vermont, it hasn't been at the top. So it's a Michigan thing. It just likes, who cares, right? As long as it works.
Right.
Yeah.
We've always been special. At least we like to think so.
Well, yeah. It's a nice way to put it.
Aaron.
Hey, Aaron.
Hey, everybody.
Hey, we were just talking about Odyssey.
It's a good one. It's a champ.
For Michigan, yeah.
It is in Michigan. Shocked me, which is good.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is where it's like, you're lucky if you can grow Odyssey where you are. In New York, it was terrible.
In North Dakota, too.
Go over 2 states, east or west, terrible.
Yeah.
Well, on that note, it is 3:30 and it's time for another terrible version of the Small Grains for Brewing and Distilling Happy Hour. Today, our guest is Dr. Rich Horsley from North Dakota State University. Thank you, everyone, for being here. This is the first session of our second run. So the first one was so successful that we're back. And we'll be hearing about barley breeding for non-traditional environments. So the East and Midwest, and observations probably surrounding the Eastern Spring Barley Nursery. So yeah, I'm looking forward to a great conversation. We've already had a great conversation.
I just gave my talk. I gave the highlight already.
It was about Odyssey.
Yeah.
Well, without further ruminations from myself, Rich, take it away.
Okay, yeah, I'm going to share my screen. See if we got that. Let me know when it's ready to share.
Oh, I'm sorry. I probably have to.
Okay.
I have to give you.
Okay.
I got it.
I got it.
Okay.
I'll go there and then go try to look for it.
This process is getting more difficult the way it seems of finding the right page to share.
Yeah, I got too much stuff open. I'll have to clean it up. There we go. Is that working?
It is.
Okay. So just going to talk a little bit about our work in breeding barley for the craft beer market and how that's really been facilitated by this Eastern Spring Barley Network. So that's that ESBN. And cooperators are Paul Schwartz, our barley cereal chemist here at NDSU, and then all of our cooperators in the States. I'll mention them as I go through. So some of this is, I didn't know who the audience was going to be completely. So you've been to barley breeding talks, you've heard some of these couple slides before. You know, breeding in its simplest sense, it's just putting all the good genes in one plant. You know, all the genes for agronomic traits, malt quality traits, and disease resistance. In total, when it comes to all these traits, there's 26 traits that I regularly collect data on. Now, if we think about our traditional breeding programs in the US and Canada, the big programs started right after World War II. You know, the programs here at NDSU and up in Canada. And we were breeding for the adjunct market. You know, we were breeding for that beer that used anywhere from what, 15% corn or rice to, well, you know, to much higher levels than that. So that's what we've been doing for 80 years or more, is breeding for this brewer. So trying to breed for the craft market was quite different. And it was really kind of fun talking with craft brewers, because I would always ask them, you know, what are you looking for? And they would tell us these lower protein levels, but lower enzyme levels especially. And on the adjunct brewer, and Aaron can tell you this, that basically what they were asking for is more. We want more DP. Well, how high of alpha do you want? As high as you can get it. And so, you know, if things didn't have these extremely high levels of enzyme, we threw them out. They could be high yielding, could have good disease resistance, but if they didn't meet that profile that the adjunct brewer, you know, they didn't go very far in the program. So talking with the craft brewers, when they were telling us the things that they really liked in the barley, you know, I started thinking right away, it's like, man, all the stuff we've been throwing out is exactly what we need to be keeping in the program. So conversations like this are really important, because it's really the end user that defines what quality is. It's not me. I mean, if I was breeding what I wanted, it'd be semi-dwarf 6-year-old barleys. They're great, they're short, they're strong, they're sexy, but nobody wants them. So, so here we are with 2-row, because that's what the market wants, and that's okay. You know, breeding these varieties, it takes anywhere from 10 to 13 years at a minimum. If you're making a cross between 2 really adapted varieties, adapted to your region, at a minimum, it's going to take 13 years for that farmer to get the seed to grow that new variety. So crosses I made this fall in 2020 won't be available to the farmer until 2033. So can you tell me what the quality needs are going to be at that time? What are going to be the date diseases at that time? But that's the frame we're looking at for doing our breeding. So a couple of pictures here. This is our winter nursery in New Zealand, where we can't go this year. I'd be in New Zealand right now harvesting. And then our field, the best fields you have are the ones that you're almost done harvesting, or you completely harvested. So this development of breeders really depends on this cooperative effort between the end users and us. And I think Mike Davis and American Malting Barley Association have done a really good job at keeping the breeders kind of in lockstep and breeding for the right things. Our breeding program, we use conventional breeding methods, but we also use molecular markers in genomic selection, and we use no GMO methods. So when we meet with growers, the most important decision that grower can make is which variety to grow. And I don't pick the varieties, it's what your buyer's telling you will buy. So, you know, barley is one of the few crops that's purchased by name. Hops, barley, and potatoes are only 3 that I know of that are really identity preserved markets. So ask your buyer what they're buying, because there's a long list of these varieties that are on the American Malting Barley Association's recommended list. But very, very few of these will be purchased at any one location. Because some of them are very specific to regions. These Moravian barleys they're mostly going to go to Molson Coors, and they're going to be grown typically in Idaho and in Colorado. Whereas the some AAC Connect and Synergy will be more Midwest barleys, or ND Genesis and Pinnacle. The varieties in red, those are the winter barleys. And then this list of 6 rows is just getting smaller and smaller all the time. Now, one thing you may not know when you look at this list of varieties, almost all of these varieties, the spring varieties in the black, All of those were developed for the adjunct market, except for Genie and Odyssey. Those came out of Germany. So those were for 100% malt beers, but all of these other varieties, none of them were made for the craft market. They were developed for the adjunct market. So we're just trying, on Explorer is another one, out of Secobra, out of France. We're trying to make these work in the craft side. And, or the brewers are, not me, but we're trying to get more and more craft type varieties up here. These winter barleys, like Violetta and Puffin, some of those will work in the, for that craft market. And if you look at the location of the programs, traditionally these programs for barley were areas where you didn't grow corn. Corn wasn't really well adapted to this region. This was a cereals area, wheat and barley. And so those programs here in Fargo, Ag Canada program up in Brandon, the Crop Development Center up in Saskatoon are still very, very large programs. A program in Montana, and then these other programs in Idaho, both for Anheuser-Busch and for the Aberdeen, Idaho, and then Coors' program out here. But there are these winter programs. The Virginia Tech program has been around quite a while. Eric Stockinger's program in Worcester is probably less than 6 years old now, probably closer to 3 to 5 years, well, about 5 years. And then Mark Sorrells has really expanded his program, and you'll hear more from him in one of these other weeks. I think you'll hear about his new variety. But he's working on springs and winters. And really that's the transition zone, right? When you get to this line here, north of this line in Michigan is kind of right in the middle of it. If you're south of that line, the winter barleys seem to do okay. And if you're north of that line, then the spring barleys. And so right, Mark's right on that edge here in Ithaca. And you guys are testing both springs and winters in Michigan and probably finding the winters yield better. So, okay, I'll get that at the very end. I'm giving a few chats, so save your questions. But Brooke was asking, what would it cost to run a program these days? Just the annual cost of running our program is about $350,000 a year, and that's not for equipment. So that's just the operating, and that doesn't include anything in pathology or anything in cereal in Paul Schwartz's program. That $350,000 is strictly my program. And it's not cheap. That's why every state can't do it. Got to put a 6-year-old picture in there. Just can't get it out of my system. Okay. So what are the needs for the Eastern barley growing region? And when I started this program with all of you in 2015, I thought protein was going to be the biggest problem. Too high of protein. I thought plumps were going to be a problem, and thought fusarium was going to be a real big problem. And I was wrong. There's nothing wrong with that. That makes it fun. The most difficult problem when you go further east all the time are these warm nighttime temperatures. I tell people barley's like you. If you want your air conditioning on at night, the barley's not happy. It needs that cool night to recover. If you go out to Idaho and Montana and Colorado, that barley, it's growing at 3,000 to 6,000 feet. It's getting down in the 50s every night. It may get hot during the day, but it's getting pretty cool at night. It's irrigated. That barley loves that environment. But when we go further and further east, those 70s, 75, even high 70s are very tough on the barley. What I learned working with all these trials now the last 6 years is pre-harvest sprout is by far the biggest issue. It's just, and especially with the 2 rows. But I think there's some positivity there we can talk about. Fusarium, it's still going to be a local issue. We still see it a problem, but I really haven't seen it that much in our trials. And net and spot blotch, 2 foliar diseases. If you want to see net blotch, you want to see if you have problems, go look at Pinnacle. It'll be hammered. So it's there as a check. So the American Malting Barley Association has done a great job at keeping the breeders informed on what the industry wants. Their newer table, I think might have a 4th column. Oh, maybe it's 3 columns now. Your adjunct 2-road, which is your traditional 2-road program. This column for the all malt brewing and the distillers 2 rows. And then this new column is the grain distiller 2-row. And the biggest difference in between the adjunct and the all malt, it's going to be a little bit lower protein needs for the craft brewer, the 100 malt brewer. And then you'll see on the enzymes down here, you'll see lower numbers. See the adjunct brewer, just give me more enzyme, greater than 140, greater than 50 for alpha. You give them 80 on an alpha, they're happy. You know, you give a craft brewer an 80 in alpha, that's just not going to work. So that's the biggest difference between the craft malt or 100% malt and your adjunct brewers. So this is we started talking about, you know, putting a trial out in the Eastern US, and this came out of Mike, one of the meetings that AMBA has out in San Diego. You know, the best conversations are over a beer. And it was Andrea Stanley, Mark Sorrells, and me. We sat, you know, we really need to do a test, a uniform test on these varieties. And so I asked Mark, I go, Mark, if I gave you some barleys, would you grow them? He goes, sure. And then Andrea goes, oh, I'll get other people to grow them too. So Andrea contacted people at UMass and Vermont and Maine. And we got the people on Michigan in 1 year. In the first year, we had all these locations I'll show you, and we had 25 entries. And so the initial trial only had entries from Canada and the US. And it's based on input we get from conversations like this, what varieties should we test? And at the beginning, we tried some heritage varieties, some older varieties. We tried Clogus and Harrington, and they just didn't work. And so heritage varieties are good in tomatoes and apples. They don't work really well in barley. So these are the sites that we have. Fargo's here as a reference because I know how the barleys behave in Fargo. So a lot of times you'll see me making comparisons to Fargo. 3 sites in Michigan. Posen's been the most common site in that northeast part of the state. So I'll just call this northeast when you see the data. Indiana's no longer in the ESBN. I say that was a successful test because they found out spring barley doesn't work. So we're not going to waste our time on spring barley. So to me, that's success. You know, let's focus on winters, and that's what they're doing. Eric Stockinger here in Worcester, Pennsylvania, the person retired, so we don't have any trials there right now. Ithaca, Rutgers, Heather Darby up here in University of Vermont, Ellen Mallory up in University of Maine, and then we have the site at UMass. So some really great sites. I get lots of good information that I would never, ever get here in Fargo or North Dakota. Getting data on pre-harvest sprout, getting data on powdery mildew like we talked about. Get those out here. So all the cooperators, we asked them, we send them 25 varieties each year, ask them to collect data on the ones in red are ones we want them to collect every year, days to heading, plant height, and yield. But if they get lodging or see diseases, go ahead and collect some data on that. The barley quality data, you can see again, this stirring number, which is your sprout, has been really important to us. We don't see a lot of variation in plumpness, 1,000 kernel weight, or in protein. They're all really good. So I won't talk too much about those, but we get those every year. And then we have been malting 3 to 4 locations each year in Paul Schwartz's lab. And those are just the typical spectrum of malt quality analyses. And I'll show you a little bit, and I don't have a lot of data, but I'll show you a little bit of data. So the data I will show you will be those entries that were tested for 2 or 3 years, from 2018 through 2020. And we have one experimental is out of my program. This is a line that's in AMBA plant scale testing, and we could release this as early as next year. We got some varieties out of Canada, Connect and Synergy. And we also have Nude Ale, which is a very popular variety in the Maine and Vermont area. And then we have some varieties out of Germany from Ackermann, Accordine, and Esma. I have one more Sangria. We have some KWS varieties that have done really well. Fanta and Tinka were two that have been tested multiple years. LCS, or Lima grain cereal seeds. We have Genie and Odyssey, and that will cover all our varieties. And a couple from NDSU. We got Pinnacle, ND Genesis, and then I have a 6-row in there, Tradition, because that's my sprout check. So what I have here, these are 3 years of trials in Michigan, and then I have the data from Fargo. So you can see yield, for example, in Fargo, those 3 years was 85 bushel in the trial in the ESBN, and you can see in Chatham about 55. That Northeast Posen mostly 66, and then KBS being closer down to 57. To me, this is probably just indicative of the heat, and probably winter barley is doing better in those locations than spring barley. And that's probably being reflected in these lower yields. Test weights, they're fine. They're above 46, which is what you need to be. Really low proteins. I always thought protein was going to be an issue. Not a problem. Don hasn't been a problem. A little bit higher at KBS, but this is the trait that really has been the toughest, and that's the RVA, or the stirring number. The magic number here is 120. If you're above 120, that's sound grain. If you're below 120, that's indicative of grain damage from pre-harvest sprout. So, on average, these 3 years, it's not too bad. I mean, there's years up in northern Maine, for example, and I think a couple years, well, about 3 or 4 years ago in Chatham, we have stirring numbers of 6, 12. You wonder if this stuff doesn't have green leaves hanging out of it. It's pretty sprouted. But so it is a big problem we do watch out for. So what I did on these analyses, I don't want to talk about all 25 varieties, but I analyzed data across the 3 years, 2018, 19, and 20. And I just looked at the Chatham, the Northeast Michigan, and the Hickory Corners data. And I just looked at the top 5 varieties, and this happens to be for yield. And the ones in red are lines or varieties that were in the top 5 at all 3 locations. So this experimental for my program has done very well. And ESMA did very well. Some honorable mentions, Genesis was in the top 2 at 2 locations. Fantech, for this trade, it's only 1, but Odyssey does show up in the yield as being in the top 5 at 2 of the 3 locations. So this is when I was going, wow, I didn't know this about Odyssey, because if I relied on North Dakota data, I would never thought. Now look at a pre-harvest sprout. What are the most resistant varieties to pre-harvest sprout? And what you'll find is the European varieties do very, very well. Most of them, I should say. And KWS Fantex was in the top 3 at all 3 locations. Genesis, this is a surprise. Sometimes you get data that surprises you. Genesis is not the #1 sprout resistant variety in Northeast. It's an artifact. I don't know what happened. Explorer has done very well. It's a European variety out of Sacobra from France. Accordine, you see at 2 locations doing very well. That's out of Germany. And then we have Genie in the top 5 at 2 locations. Odyssey, you're only seeing 1 location, but it's in number 6 at both of these. So it's done very, very well. So based on those high yielding varieties, or those varieties very resistant to sprout, I looked at, this is Posen. This is the agronomic data from all 3 locations. And not just Posen. This is all 3 locations. And the varieties I have in red were the high yielding varieties. The varieties in black were those that were identified as being the best sprout resistant varieties. And then this green one, Odyssey, at the bottom is one that just did well for sprout resistance and for yield. And so if we just go focus over here on yield, you can see this this experimental line from NDSU was at the highest at all 3 locations. So this is 6 station years worth of data. And then Genesis was a little bit behind it, but you know, Odyssey's not that bad at 61. There's much worse than that. I mean, Genie at 54 and Accordine at 54. So I would call this Genesis or Odyssey doing very well. But what really shows is the steering numbers. So remember, you want to be above 120. So, you know, the Accordine, Explorer, look at Genie, 143, Odyssey, 138. Those are good varieties. Those are pretty sprout resistance. Esma's, you know, not all European varieties are resistant to sprout. Esma does sprout. There are some other European varieties that do sprout. But you can see this experimental from NDSU and Genesis, they're not going to be anywhere near what these are for resistance. And there's other varieties even worse than these NDSU ones. Connect and Synergy are pretty susceptible. The European varieties are nice for straw because they're semi-dwarfs and they have very good straw strength. So let's look at Odyssey. The heading date, it's right in the middle, which is good because some of these European varieties can get pretty late. So it's not as early as the North American ones, but it's a little earlier. It's short, very strong straw, and pretty good disease resistance, or pretty good yield potential. Look at the malt quality. Now the malt quality data is only from Posen, and we did malt that in 2018 and 2019. And the trait to focus on here is extract. Extract to the brewer is as important as yield to the farmer. The higher the extract, the less beer, the less malt you have to use to make that beer. If you're a large regional brewer or a national brewer, this extract number, this difference between 82 and 81.6, that 0.4 difference is huge if you're a very, very large national brewer. If you're a small tap room, you know, a 3-barrel system, 7-barrel system, you know, this number is not going to be as critical. A 0.4 difference is not going to be a problem. The high yielding varieties, you can tell they had very good extracts, but look at Odyssey. We'll just focus on that one. 94 plump, 10.5, 10.6 protein. It's nice all the way across. Low beta glucans. And when I saw this, I went, wow, they've got a variety they can use right now, and I heard that that's the one being grown, and that's good. That's the one that's working. It's going to be interesting to see how this experimental works out, because it is very high extract, high yield potential. The beta glucans are much better than Genesis or Pinnacle out of our program. Not as low as the European stuff, or the Canadian material, but still in the right direction. You want low beta glucan, and the European stuff is just phenomenally low, which is good because high beta glucans slow down filtration or lautering. So that's all I had. Just a quick go through the data. You know, no one barley variety is perfect for all of the traits that we look at, but I would say LCS Odyssey is about as close as it gets for right now for Michigan. Looks really good. Pre-harvest sprout is still going to be the risk factor, I think, that's going to impact growers the most. Just to give you an example, 2019 for us was a horrible year for pre-harvest sprout. We took germinations right at harvest or shortly after, and they were in the 90s. They were good. We just took germs just recently, you know, a year and a half later, and they're down at 38, below 40%. So sometime during the year in storage, that germination is just going to crash. And so you just can't reliably store that sprouted grain and even hope for it to do well in the future. And I believe we can find varieties that'll work for each production area. And right now for Michigan, I think you have that. The acknowledgements, the Brewers Association funded this program for 5 years. It was time to move on. They're not going to be funding this one anymore, I don't think. AMBA just helps our general breeding program, so to get varieties to you. Andrea and Kristen Stanley from Valley Malt have been really important for us in helping us get this trial started, the group at NDSU, and then all of our cooperators. And, you know, Brooke asked a question about how much money does it take a year? This is just one of our research sites up in Osnabrock, North Dakota. Our breeding program in any one year, we have about 1,200 to 1,300 experimental barley varieties we're evaluating at 6 locations. So it's a large effort. We use winter nurseries in New Zealand, Puerto Rico, and Arizona. So it's not cheap to do this. So that's where we spend so much money. So that's all I have. I'll stop sharing my screen, and so I can see everybody. So how long did that take? Oh, longer than I thought.
Long enough.
We just like to talk, you know. Sorry.
No, not at all. That's what we're here for. Thank you. Honestly, knowing how extensive your breeding program is and everything that entails, winter nurseries, I didn't think that $350,000 number was, I would have expected it to be higher, honestly.
That's if all the equipment doesn't break.
Yeah, true.
But see, I got to replace the combine, and so I had that picture of that combine there. That's about $250,000, and we don't have the money right now to buy one. Yeah. So you can't.
Yeah.
It's like any business. You can't. Capital improvements is tough.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm not really surprised at BA not choosing not to continue to fund the project, not necessarily because they don't want to or don't see the value in it, but there's been a lot of changes with BA over the past year.
Well, they suspended their grant program last year in fall 2020. They went through the program, but I just think they decided they didn't fund anything in 2020. And so I didn't look to see if there was an RFP this year or not. I haven't seen one yet. Have you, Mike?
No, well, they make a lot of their revenue comes from events, and with COVID, they had to cut back. So no, they have not resurrected their grant program. So I think they'll get back on it once they're able to stabilize. They had to let people go, and that was too bad. But they're still there, and they're still partners helping us lobby. Hey, to follow up, you guys got me sold on Odyssey for my Washington Island farm in Wisconsin. We talked about it earlier again, but how did it do on powdery mildew?
It'll be good. It'll be resilient. All the European stuff, that's probably one of their biggest diseases there. So
I think I'll try some of the Genesis too. That sounds like might do okay with the powdery. I know it's a good malting variety. Plus, we helped develop it, so.
No, go with the experimental over the Genesis, right, Rich? I mean, it's got better modification.
Yeah, but I don't know what its mildew resistance is.
Oh.
So, like I said, I didn't know until I went up. I was in Amherst looking at some stuff and went, oh, surprise. Because in the greenhouse, we don't let powdery mildew because everything's susceptible. So we control the hell out of it in the greenhouse. We have sulfur burners going, it smells like Yellowstone in there. Just to keep the mildew down.
I can sympathize with your capital improvement struggle. I mean, it's the same for all of us. The price of equipment has just skyrocketed, whereas our budgets for research infrastructure has gone down, if anything, right? So that is a major challenge.
Yeah, my side job here, I'm a barley breeder, is my fun job. Department head's not my fun job, but doing that for about 10, 11 years now. But every biennium for equipment for the entire department, I get about $320,000. And I have 42 faculty. So man, I don't get to buy very much. So we have to leverage those funds as much as possible. And it has to be multi-project users. So no one likes to share combines. You just can't do it because everybody's trying to harvest at the same time. And if you do let someone borrow it, it doesn't come back in the same shape, does it? Because no.
Nope. It's a challenge for sure.
Yeah.
Okay, more technical question.
Yeah.
You see technologies on the horizon that might enhance the speed at which you can make an initial cross to getting a variety.
Yeah, the genomic selection is is really working. It just, I'll give you an example, beta glucan. We made the biggest gains we made in beta glucans, making them go down, is through genomic selection. So I'll go back pre-genomic selection, 2017, 16, 15. We're testing 1,000 new experimentals for the very first time every year. And the average beta glucan on those compared, how do I do it? What I did is, I should have put that slide in here, but what percent of the lines had beta glucan less than Genesis? That's how I used to figure it. How many were below Genesis, which isn't low enough, but still. And so before genomic selection, out of that 1,000 lines, only 1/3 of them had acceptable beta glucans. So I was testing 1,000 lines, but 350 of them worked, and 650 of them would toast before I even tested them, right? So I was testing stuff I didn't need to test. The 3 years that we've been using genomic selection for that trait, we're up at 85% of the lines going into that yield trial now have beta glucan less than Genesis, which still isn't low enough, but it's still an improvement. And so instead of testing 1,000 lines or 1,200 lines like I used to do, now I only test about 860 in that first trial, because I just throw them away before I even bring them back from Arizona. And now we're using that information to plan our crosses. It's pretty cool, actually. And it seems very black box, but it's working. So and people go, how does it work? I don't know, but it works. It's all based on the DNA. And RAR helped us fund that work, because we spend about $30,000 a year on markers, and it works. So I test all 26 traits to see which ones genomic selection would work for, and it worked for 3. And now we're trying to make it work for other traits, trying to design a new chip. So
$30,000 seems like an easy price to pay if you can shave years off the process.
It doesn't really shave. I don't know if it shaves years. It just makes your program much, much more efficient. You don't have to put all that stuff out in the material. You're not making all those crosses. So your efficiencies go way up. And then it allows you to, like fan, the BA people wanted lower fan. Now we can put more emphasis on that one trait, because genomic selection is not working really well. So then it's the numbers game. Test a lot to find a few. So it allows you, I don't know, it's more flexibility.
Hey, Rich, with those other locations like New Zealand and I think you said Puerto Rico, do you get just an additional crop year, or do you get even more than one crop year out of those?
Yeah,
you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, no, I know what you mean. That's really good. New Zealand's a great location because the latitude is pretty close to what we are here. So the plants look very similar. The reason I use 3 locations like that is to spread out my workload. We used to use only Arizona, and that material would come back from Arizona in mid-April. And so we'd be trying to thresh 20 to 25,000 individual heads and trying to clean up 1,500 bags of seed. And planting sometimes before the seed even came back. So it was just nuts. You're trying to prep all the seed to get it planted before it starts raining, and before it just didn't work. So New Zealand, the seed is coming back in the second week of February, and so we could start prepping all that seed. And then Puerto Rico comes back again before Arizona, so it just spread the workload out, and it just made it more efficient for us. Yeah. This year we're only in Arizona, and it's going to be an early spring, and everyone's not going to be very happy with each other come mid-April when they're sitting here threshing seed till midnight, packaging seed up so we can go plant before it rains. Yeah. You know how that is. When it's ready to plant, man, you better have it ready to go on the ground. So.
Do you do that same service for New Zealand and Australia researchers?
No, their stuff doesn't work really well here. There's big quarantine issues with Australia. You could not go to Australia with stuff because stuff has to go quarantine for a season before it can go out to the field. New Zealand's a little bit better about it. When we bring the Australian stuff here, it heads really early. It's just different. It's very dayland sensitive. And our North American, the Canadian stuff and the US material is not very dayland sensitive. It's very neutral. So yeah, the Australian stuff does horrible. It'll head when it's about that tall, and it'll head in early June. You know, it's just crazy. We don't cross to it because it just brings all kinds of issues.
Rich, could you or Mike give us an update on what's going on at the CRC Malt Lab in Madison? Are they working? Have you got any data for them ever?
I haven't got, I got a third of my data back last year. The rest is still sitting there. We haven't shipped anything from 2020 because there's no one working there yet. So we're going to be planting blind this year. And so that's going to be really, I don't know how I'm going to pay for all this stuff this year. We're going to put a hell of a lot of plots out because we don't have any malt data. So, you know, it is what it is. You know, we're all in the same boat. I know, Mike, you can talk. In 2018 was a mess too. The government shut down. So, hell, they shut down for close to 2 months then. At least we got data. Mike, you can cover it. So,
they were first shut down, of course, because of COVID. Like most labs. And then their problem was, in order to come back online, it turned out their air system was not adequate to safely bring everyone back in again. And that's been the big snag, unfortunately. That is being addressed now, and we're just really hopeful if that's addressed, they can get back in there. And I think they already have some plans now for an initial small startup. So like Rich said, though, this is a loss. It's this, they can get caught up again, they think. We have helped bring in new monies there, and they've been able to increase their capacity, which hasn't been totally used. So they're hoping to slowly crank up and then just go all out and try to get all they can get done for the breeders. But
yeah,
it's a setback.
Yeah, because normally that first year we had 800, we had 860 first year lines last year. We would have culled that down to about 80. But I can get it down to about 360. So we're going to be testing nearly 200 more lines just in that level of testing than we're normally doing. So, you know, what do you do? And that's replicated at 6 locations. We may not replicate stuff. Well, we'll have to think about it. So, you know,
it makes it seem like Jamie Sherman and Bob Rugerman are fairly prescient in that they wanted to bring in some of their own in-house capability. What do you think about that strategy?
I don't know. You know, that's the way it used to be. We still have the malt plant, you know, the malt lab here in Fargo. It was nice getting all the data from one location because I know we ran into trouble in the 80s with a variety released from NDSU, and it had bad beta glucans and it just wasn't picked up the way NDSU was malting. But once the maltsters got a hold of it, once we got data from Madison, it was quite obvious there was issues with that variety. And so by having one lab test everybody's lines, I think there's gonna be fewer surprises. I support a single lab.
I'll just comment on that too. Of course, you know, if everybody has a lab, you're talking significant cost. And it's always made sense from our standpoint, trying to coordinate a national program to have it at one location, also uniformity. However, we had a capacity problem of about 6,000. We have addressed that, and I think they're going to be able to push up to 15,000 a year. With that said, though, that's still with all the, you got to remember when for years and years, there weren't that many programs that needed Madison. Now we have breeding all over the U.S. and we have research all over the U.S. and there's a lot of people wanting malting quality data. So there is room for other players, and as long as they can be funded. Our strategy at AMBA and NBIC is to support Madison and expand that capacity. If others can find the monies like Jamie did from the Montana Wheat and Barley Committee, which has a lot of resources, then that's just a big enhancement. They're still sending samples to Madison, and then they're also using their own. They might be able to concentrate on certain quality factors, et cetera. If the resources are available, yes, everybody's always wanted to do it, and always costs money. So
Yeah.
we can support additional locations, but they're fine if people can fund them other ways.
Yeah, I mean, the person that, that runs, Paul Schwartz is running the lab in Fargo. He's a faculty member, a tenure track faculty member. So he has to be doing research. He has to be publishing. And running a service, a lab just to evaluate my materials is not going to be professionally very good for him. And so he has to do research. And I went, we both understood that. So that's why both of us didn't have problems with that stuff going to Madison. It allowed him to do a lot of work in the 90s on Don that he would never been able to do on gushing, for example, and a lot of other research on mycotoxins. And if he was doing nothing but a service lab, that stuff would have never happened. So depends where your priorities are, and it's expensive to run a lake, Aaron, that you know that.
Yeah, I mean, we've found some success. We're obviously a boutique operation. We have a capacity of 800 a year, which that's by no means appropriate for early generation screening.
Yeah.
But we have certainly found a niche audience, especially ag extension programs who have no access unless their breeder gives them access. So nitrogen trials, yield trials. We've been happy to work with the MSU guys on some of their non-barley malting projects, the wheat malting project, and private plant breeders. So KWS, LCS, APB, these guys have no other access. So yeah, we're small and boutique, but we've certainly managed to fill up our 800 a year pretty easily. And yeah, it's not cheap. We charge $150 a line, which I still feel like is giving it away, but it's working, I think, as supplemental. Griffey asked me if I'd do 600 lines for him, and he was prepared to pay. And I said, no. I said, we can't do 600 for you. Because then we're not doing anything for anyone else.
Yeah,
so we did 200 for him,
My Madison quota is 1,000 malts.
Wow.
Yeah. So, and I need the bulk of that data back by February 1st to make decisions about what I'm going to harvest in New Zealand. My guys across the street, they're clamoring. They want the planting lists right now. We start putting up the trials already. And so we need that malt data to make those decisions. And so when there's a capacity problem at Madison, Mike, we would get data back in June. Data back after March 15 doesn't do us any good.
Yeah, it's a logistical problem. Yeah, it's not the capacity. The capacity until between July and February is all that matters.
Yeah, people go, well, don't you get mad? And like, what am I going to do? It's just the way it is. And
I appreciate the insights. Yeah, just sort of understanding our own place in the system right now.
Yeah. I did think about, I talked to Paul about doing it. He goes, I've got one technician. He lost 2 technicians. When we used to malt on Fargo, he had 3 technicians, state funded technicians. He's down to 1. He can't do it now. It's just,
Aaron, your place is very important. And I've sent things your ways because there's things Madison can't do. So like I said, if they can be financed, great.
We appreciate
it. It's a numbers game. It's a numbers game on quality. The more data we get, the better. And we've been limited on quality data.
No, I appreciate that, Mike, very much. And we certainly see ourselves as a boutique shop. And I don't like to do early generation screening, but we really do like to do elite, advanced yield trials, elite variety trials, agronomic trials, research, and fill a gap that for those people who can't get into Madison or their projects aren't really appropriate. Yeah, we hope it's working well.
So you can see I'm boutique in my barley growing. That's my barley bin. It's actually a trash can, and that's my brewer's hand. He's a little bigger guy than me. He plays the saxophone too. We'll see if he can make some good beer out of it.
I see Paul is on now and might have questions on the Fargo lab.
Oh, there's Paul. Hey, Paul. Ask him some questions.
We were just talking about how Montana State and Washington, they have quality labs, and NDSU, yours is more of a research lab. You know, that's important. So.
Well, before we put Paul fully on the spot, I was talking to Eric Stockinger at Ohio State the other day, and we had a similar conversation. You know, he's got a breeding program, and he's got two different pipelines. One's double haploid lines, and the other is traditional old school crosses. And he's at an impasse right now because he needs malt analysis done. So. Yeah, so he's I think he decided he was going to contact Dr. Sherman or Hannah Turner about that stuff.
Yeah, you know, you could survive 1 year of this, but this is compounding what happened in 2018 because of the government shutdown. So that's what really makes it tough, because we went basically 2 out of the last 3 years with alt malt data to make plans. So yeah, that's one thing. You know, you talk about those double haploids, Ryan. That's where the spring barley is nice. I can use winter nurseries. The winter people can't use winter nurseries. That's why they go with double haploids, because they can only get one generation a year.
So Rich, on that numbered variety that was topping the list from North Dakota there, how much did, say, the data from Michigan play into you bringing that forward? Would have done as well just in North Dakota?
No, it's it's done well in North Dakota.
Okay.
So, I was surprised it did as well as it did in all the locations out east. So it's an exciting variety. I'm hoping we're waiting for AB to get the brewing results from AB. I think Bell's is going to test it, Mike, or I know Summit was going to test it. I don't know what Bell's is doing.
No, the good news is when you make malt for Anheuser-Busch, it's easy to satisfy some of my other craft brewing members. They might just be happy. They have some pilot units that are very equivalent to their plant scale, and they rely on those in their variety evaluation. So it could lead to use by others too. Usually in AMBA, one brewer, we just need one to kind of take the lead, testing a variety and maybe one on another one, because it takes a lot of time and investment for the maltster and the brewer. So it kind of gets spread out, but this will be an opportunity too. Like I said, there should be plenty of malt, and Rich, you're right, others will test it too.
Yeah, I mean, our target, when we go to that level of testing, that plant scale testing, our target's 30,000 bushels of production. So it's the AMBA plant scale program, but a lot of people here call it the car lot program, because they ship rail cars of malt to the brewers to do the evaluations. If you're AB or if you're Miller, I mean, AB would take 3 to 4 rail cars, and Miller used to take 1 to 2 rail cars. So they're huge. I mean, they're full commercial runs when they get to this level of testing. Very expensive, but we won't release a variety unless we have 1 year positive brewing results, because it doesn't do our brewers any good.
And that's the way it always was until AMBA became an organization of big and little companies. So New Glarus has been a very active tester of lines, and with Brees primarily because of their small batch size, and so we're just talking much smaller scale, maybe get a truckload of malt for them.
Yeah,
so
yeah.
That's the good thing within AMBA now, that the craft brewers can drive lines to recommendation. And we're going to kind of crank this up now and really try to get everybody more involved in the association. The Bells now, that would be a first, getting them involved. And this is important for us to get testing. I think lines are falling through the cracks. The breeders do a great job with all the lines that they put through early generation and then finally submit to us in pilot. We get a great range of lines in pilot that satisfy both adjunct brewing and all malt brewing. And then that going into the large testing and making the recommend, it's that larger testing program that is our bottleneck. And I think we've seen lines just fall through the cracks. So we're going to work on that even more. I'd like to see the recommended list and become much more of our public varieties. And part of that's just how we're set up. If you're a private company, you can just go to one of my members right now and give them the malt that you contracted and had malted, and they make some beer and they like it. If you're a member of AMBA, then you say, hey, I like it, put it on the list. When grown in the US, it meets my needs. So I know it's actually, so we're trying to work on getting our public sector to be competitive with what the private can do right now to get on our list. Just takes one member to say, I like it.
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, one thing good about Michigan is that your area is used to producing cereals. And so there is an infrastructure already there for raising seed, cleaning seed, storing grain. You know, if you want to get a new variety in, you know, at the beginning, maybe you ship it in from North Dakota. We've had agreements, I think, with Foundation Crop Improvement in Michigan. And I think we had a license so that you could grow Pinnacle there, your own foundation seed. So I think Michigan's very well set up to incorporate a new variety. When we look at what's going on in Maine and Vermont, to get a new variety in there, man, that's because the infrastructure is not there, you know, and the storage isn't there. They can produce really nice grain, but then they store it in totes. And then they wonder why, and then they'll send seed to Paul or send seed to Aaron and say, the germ on this one is terrible. Well, they get the grain and it's 15% moisture. You know, so Michigan's got a lot going for it, I think, for the craft area. And then you got the malt plant opening up soon in Ohio. So I think you guys got a lot of good stuff happening for you.
Yeah, thanks. It didn't really take all that long to pivot from Conlon and Pinnacle produced for certified seed and then go directly into Lima grain lines, which is where we're at now with Odyssey and Genie.
Oh, that's good.
Yeah. So speaking of Conlon, looks like we have Empire Malting on the call. And I'm going to make sure she's still there. Yeah, yep, there she is. So
Hey there.
hey, so
I don't know why my screen's not sharing. I could get on a different device.
oh, that's
I'm
okay.
here.
We can hear you. So we have one beautiful holdout, still malting Conlon.
Yeah, we
doing
like
very,
Conlon
very
quite
well.
a bit.
Mm-hmm.
That's great. I mean, I used to get really upset, Mike, your list, you know, has thoroughbred on there. Thoroughbred's a 6-row winter that was developed for the horse market. And I, you know, as a breeder, you want your stuff to be on that AMBA list. And I saw thoroughbred on there and I was pissed. You know, I was like, what the hell? They got a feed barley on there. And I work, you know, we work our whole careers, but you know something? I'm over that because I don't define quality. If Riverbends wants to use that and it works well for them, all the power to them, right? You know, that's what matters. They produce a good beer out of it. That's great. And so the same thing with Empire. Conlon's working for you. That's my favorite variety then, you know.
It's a beautiful barley. We've been growing it since around 2014 and we've had so much success with it. It was like, why switch? But I mean, we're dabbling with other ones too now, but that one has just been such a mainstay and it's made beautiful numbers and the flavor's been fantastic.
Well, good.
The brewers, they tend to like everything that we send, but the Conlon, they really have loved that for years now. So
the farmers like it because it's early. And it's
yes, the farmers do. Yes, that's right.
And that's what, you know, that worries me a little bit about some of the European stuff because that's pushing it kind of late. And so I had one in my plant scale program that was really early with the farmers here. They looked at it and go, I don't want it. That's 10% lower yielding. We're not going to grow that. But there's a niche group out there that want those early varieties. So they had other issues. But
now Rich is getting all, you got all worked up about thoroughbred again, but
no, I'm over it.
I have a few comments on it because it is relevant to our discussion. Actually, Carl, that came from malting barley breeding, actually, because he had always hoped this is a long time ago, that for Anheuser-Busch, he was trying to develop something. I mean, they were always open to using if you could produce enough anywhere. So actually, thoroughbred has some redeeming malting quality. Why is it on our list? Because you have to be a regular member to get it on our list. However, we are happy to accommodate our craft malting members, and you already, Riverbend wanted it on there and others were using it. And so in this case, I think Sierra Nevada tried it down at their North Carolina plant. They didn't really want to use it, but that's what they kind of, the regular members said, fine, we're going to help out our craft members also. So that one was craft maltster driven. So
No, I'm glad it's on the list. No,
I think
seriously.
AMBA did a service. AMBA does a service to craft, and by having a mechanism by which thoroughbred could come on the list.
That's right.
I think for guys like me, and I'll speak maybe if I could say me and Rich, the mental disconnect was that the list cannot be seen as all things to all people. And so I think for those who don't understand the list, they think, oh, if it's on the list, then it must be good. Well, it may not be good for you. It may not be good for where you are. It may not for where you want to grow. It may not be good for how you want to malt or brew. So that's a lot different though than the French, UK, Canadian, and Australian systems, which are first past the post systems. In Canada, you could never get thoroughbred on the list. In Canada, you could never get Conlon on the list. Never. If the beta glucan is 1 ppm higher than Copeland, forget it, right? So I think it's more of an understanding about what the AMBA list is, and like Mike says, how it's created, right? Which is based on merit, but which is also based on, I don't have a good word besides like pay to play, like the system that they have.
No.
Actually, the way to sum it up is it is a recommended list for members, what our members want, and percentage wise of, the amount of beer produced and malt. Yeah, we probably represent a high percentage of that production, but we sure as hell don't represent a high percentage of the players. So people don't understand that. That is our list. And so that's why it is open for members. Any member can pop one on there. That's actually been good for us relative to how do you get somebody to come into AMBA and maybe be more than an associate member? Why did Origin Malt become a regular member right off the bat? Because Rebecca Jennings was with us for a long time at RAR, but also wanted to be a player. Immediately they came on, paid the dues, got Puffin put onto our recommended list. Nobody else wanted Puffin, but there were advantages to having it on our list. So right now they're kind of our craft maltster representative in a way. Everyone's welcome to come to meetings, and as you can see with thoroughbred, there's ways to take care of our associate members also, but most of them aren't that active and most of them don't really ask for much, but if they do, we can help them out.
No, don't get me wrong on the thoroughbred. I'm glad it got on. That changed. That showed the change in AMBA in that it could be driven by small users, because that was Riverbend, and that was good for the industry.
Me too, Mike. Me too. I think that it's doing the right thing. I think it's an educational process, because I receive too many phone calls from some guy in pick a state who says, oh, I'm going to pick this because it's on the AMBA list, right? So it's an educational process about understanding the list, how to use the list appropriately in conjunction with your local extension, people and trials. It's not a list that is all things to all people.
Well, that list is important too for North Dakota, Montana, Idaho, because crop insurance. Because if you want to get crop insurance, you got to grow a variety that's on that list, or have a contract with someone. So that's another function of that list, because it's used by crop insurance. I don't know about
right. And again, then it isn't. How do you get someone to pay the minimum $5,250 to be on the board? Well, they actually have influence. They can get lines on the list. They can actually direct. They can get lines out of the breeding programs, and that's always been a selling point. We are pleased that none of our regular members dropped out. Excuse me. I got to tell you, some of them were really hurting. A lot of associate members stayed in, and some with brewers with all on-premise sales. Some of those amazed me. The others had to drop out. I mean, we lost maybe 10 or so associate members, and volumes are down in 2020, which determines our 2021 dues. So we've had to cut back on our research, but still fully staffed. And members staying in, they're just really happy because we've been hitting on all 8 cylinders, getting federal money. So that little drop in our program relative to, all that we've gotten for SCAB and that small grain genomic initiative, now we got another $1 million and 900,000 net for the barley pest initiative. That's been a good selling point for the membership. So this will be good in terms of keeping AMBA going. After I retire at the end of this year, Scott takes over, and we will be looking for a new vice president and technical director to start about October 1. So not all chiseled in stone, but we're close to putting that all into play this year. So that's why you're going to be seeing me then in a different, I'm just going to be the Washington Island grower trying to get some good malting barley up on the island to feed the animals that I shoot and make some beer.
That sounds absolutely wonderful. Yeah, I was waiting to talk about like what a sea change and agree with everyone what a sea change that was getting thoroughbred on the list, and the insurance component is huge. I think that was, I would assume, a huge driver in why Rebecca wanted to get Puffin on that list, to be able to afford some protection more protection for the growers in Ohio and Michigan, where they're contracting Puffin to be grown. Yeah.
When is that plant going to open?
I don't know.
Never.
Are they going to start? They were going to start contracting this coming summer or last summer?
There's been barley in the ground for 3 or so years, but they'll never build it. Just by prediction.
Any more sunny predictions from anyone?
Anonymously.
That's not non-sunny. That's not non-sunny. It's business. They have an arrangement.
They're getting
Ryan, the days are getting longer every day. It's going to be sunny out there.
Dues. They're getting malt made and they're getting barley grown. Aaron, you're right. It's working.
Yeah. Why would you build a malt house? Who would want a malt house if you could?
I don't know about. I know nothing about whether they're going to build, so I'm not adding to that. But I'm just saying, current situation that I'm happy. Pay your dues. I'm really happy with you. And if you don't right now, we understand because some sure couldn't.
Pay your farmers, right, Ryan?
Yeah.
That's right.
Optimally, that's what farmers want, is to be
That's right.
compensated for their labor. That's all we can really ask of anyone, right? Yeah, you're right, Aaron. That was a sunny prediction. The sun causes cancer, so I mean, it's not all it's not all positive. Whoa. All right. So any other topics anyone wants to touch on while we're talking barley breeding? Oh, I actually have one anecdote. So looking over the ESBN data for Michigan from 2020 in particular, I was expecting a lot more Don accumulation, especially in those 2 northern sites, because they were really, like, looking at them, they appeared to be ravaged by foliar disease. Not that that has anything to do with Don at all, but I was like, well, fungus is just taking over these 2 fields here, and expected to see more Don than that, but it was really, really low based on what I saw when I was up there walking the fields.
Chris isn't Don. Do you spray the trials at all, Brooke, at KBF?
Yeah, we do. I think we used Mirvis Ace at KBS. Posen, I don't think got sprayed, but I think Chatham did with Prosaro or something like that.
I mean, yeah, all these varieties have some inherent resistance on them. So, we put a fungicide on them. You can get it from a big regional problem down to just a small local problem. So no, that's
a good question though, that Brooke, or Rich, if you're doing a nursery like this, like the ESBN, where you're trying to find varieties that will succeed in the environment agronomically. I mean, they're all malting varieties essentially, right? So the focus was agronomic success. Should you treat them the way you would, as close as you would in production, like in this case, spray, or should you not, so that you get a bigger differential?
I think it's a personal, I mean, if I was like Brooke and all of those sites, I would use the production practices that the farmers are using, because that because you need to make recommendations to them too. Us, we're looking for trying to improve the genetics, and so we don't use fungicides. But no, for the ESBNs, yeah, unless you're doing it organically, which Maine and Vermont are both organic. Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, the breeder in Ackerman, he uses multiple fungicide sprays. He uses growth regulators, and I go, "What are you doing?" He goes, "That's what our farmers do." I go, "Okay, makes sense."
The other thing I would add about, and I think Allison could really give us insight here, which is that what we've seen in Michigan and New York is the interaction between management and genetics, right? Like Allison didn't tell you her secret sauce for what makes Conlon so successful. And it's a process we've used here in New York with 6-row, right? So when people grow 6-row, they think North Dakota 6-row, it's going to be 13% protein. Well, wait a minute, not necessarily. Keep the nitrogen low, sacrifice some yield. We grow Quest in New York at 10% protein. The extract is 82. The extract is the same as a 2-row, right? And I think we see success with Conlon. The modification, the beta-glucan, much easier when the protein is not 12.5, but maybe when it's 10.5. Like Allison how does that management tie in with your success?
You're muted. The mute's not on. It's not capturing.
How about now?
There we are.
Yeah, you're totally right. Generally, when the protein comes back above 12, I know that it's going to be a struggle to modify that barley and get the BG way down below 100 is going to be, pretty much impractical. So we go into it with a very low protein regimen in mind and fertilizer in check, maybe a higher plant population in the field. That helps too. We'll seed it a little heavier than, maybe an Odyssey. We don't, we are not so light on the fertilizer. So I guess one thing that I noticed with the Conlon is that the protein is one thing, and it's the one thing that everybody likes to talk about. But the other thing that we really like about the Conlon is, so the sprout resistance is really a huge advantage in Michigan. And maybe it makes it more difficult to malt. You have to have more patience. But, it does seem like some of the more modern trends, the modern varieties, the up and coming, the new varieties are all quick to modify, quick to sprout, quick to uptake water. That's like the goal. But that's really not a great goal for somebody sitting in Michigan trying to grow a barley, because those are the barleys you're going to have PHS with all the time.
Yeah, I mean,
so Conlon's been just very good in that regard for us.
I mean, part of it is breeders from the programs in Canada, in Brandon and Saskatoon and NDSU. We were asked for more enzymes, and we found as we push those alpha amylase values way up, and that stuff they're linked. That high alpha amylase is linked to that pre-harvest sprout, and so we've been our own worst enemies on that trade. Yeah. And then the other thing is we want data back so quick to make decisions. Yeah. So sure. I'm getting data back before Thanksgiving, and throwing out all the lines that don't modify. Well, those lines that didn't modify probably has some dormancy in them. So probably made some mistakes 20 years ago that I'm kicking myself over.
That's such a good insight, Rich. And the reverse has happened in New York. So every time Mark Sorrells sends his stuff in, he's got, like when he had Endeavor in the ESBN and he sends it in, and he would send it in to get it done at Madison, and it wouldn't get done the reverse till like April. Endeavor looked terrible with high beta glucan, which is not true. Endeavor is phenomenal, but that's because it's a spring type winter. Endeavor has no sprout resistance. So those seeds were essentially, like you experienced, were dead. The germination was probably down to 50% on those Endeavor seeds because the RVA was like 20. And they wouldn't modify well in the malting because Madison doesn't do germination. There was no way to know that it was because the germination was poor, not because Endeavor actually has phenomenal malt quality. So that can even work in reverse. The sprouty varieties can end up looking terrible on malt quality if they're malted too late.
I keep Conlon in my trials as a check because I look at the S over T's on it, and that tells me if there's dormancy in that barley or not. If I'm getting, if Synergy and Genesis are coming in at 44 S over T's and Conlon's coming in at 37s, then I know there's dormancy causing that problem. So yeah, Conlon's a good line. It's just the beta glucans. So I think we've got that fixed.
But not for a skilled and patient maltstress.
Yeah, that's right.
Which one is better resisting sprouting, Conlon or Odyssey?
Odyssey.
Odyssey's in Michigan. It looks like a phenomenal variety. Because it looks farmer friendly, sprout resistance, disease resistance. I don't know. I have to go look at it. It gets foliar diseases on it. You're going to need to spray it. But, you're spraying it anyway for scabs. So what the heck?
It's also a non-GN. It's a glycosidic nitrile null variety. This is very, very important for the all malt distilling market, which is a growing market.
Yeah, it's a distilling type. Yeah.
Very important.
Yeah, we like that one. Nice plump kernels with the Odyssey. Probably a good one for us. We're definitely leaning into it this year. So
I took it out of my trials in North Dakota, but somebody's asking me to put it back in. And I know all the research centers are going to gripe. Why are you putting that back in there? We don't want to grow that thing. Well,
Pretty sure that was us.
no, no, it wasn't North Dakota. No, I'm talking about my trials in North Dakota.
Oh.
Yeah. Oh, I gave up. Everybody sent me. See, the main people wanted New Dales. You guys said we don't want New Dale. I dropped New Dale last year. Got holy hell from the Northeast people about dropping that variety. So
Yeah, New Deal does about as well as Synergy does in Michigan. If you get lucky, sure, but it seems risky.
yeah.
Conlon, it was a few years ago, one of those years I asked for Conlon to be included and it was, but after that I gave up the fight. I think a lot of other people wanted it kicked out. But if it were to reappear in the ESBN this year, I would not at all be mad about that, just because we have so much deep data on that and really not much else aside from Pinnacle.
Yeah, it's got the best scab resistance too.
yeah,
That's my scab resistant check.
This is just anecdotal, but in 2016 and 2015, when we had real dry periods during grain fill, at harvest time, Pinnacle came back really thin. Plumpness was terrible on Pinnacle from what I saw when I was in the malt house and doing QA, but Conlon, those 2 years, the plumps didn't seem to suffer at all.
Pinnacle was probably really thin because of it's so susceptible to foliar diseases. And it's seed-borne, that foliar disease. That's another story. We don't need to go into that, but encourage seed treatment, if possible, on before planting, because it really makes a big difference on something like Pinnacle. So, but yeah, Pinnacle's in there just because people like, if you want to go look at disease, that's right where I walk. I go look at Pinnacle. So.
Yeah, a lot of our Pinnacle plots in our trials this past year, actually something happened where they didn't come up, or we just didn't have Pinnacle as a check, and it was disappointing. So I went out to do my virtual crop walks, all primed and ready to look at some Pinnacle and see what havoc nature had wrought, and it wasn't there.
Yeah, I mean,
disappointed.
That's where I walk. When I go look in the field of mine, I go to Pinnacle plots just to see if I have disease or not. And so a few years ago, I went and looked at my stuff on campus, went to Pinnacle, it was clean. Went up 3 miles to the north to our plots on the airport. And I looked at my first year yield trials, Pinnacle was clean. I go to my advanced yield trial, which is about 100 yards away, and the Pinnacle is just clobbered, just hammered. What's going on? Well, the stuff on campus that was clean, we seed treated. That's our drill strips. The PYTs, the preliminary yield trials that were clean, the seed source was Arizona. nothing comes. That seed is bright coming back from Arizona. The stuff that was full of disease was non-treated seed grown in North Dakota, was my seed. And so it was completely seed-borne. Seed treatment made all the difference in the world. So for that variety. Pinnacle discolors too.
Oh yeah.
I
Yeah.
can just say that unintentionally, I've always looked for treated seed, but we've never planted treated seed. Just throwing that in there.
Yeah, it depends if you're set, your growers are set up to put the treatment on or not.
Yeah, you're in a pretty unique area there up there too. You're on sand, which explains why you have to apply so much nitrogen, right, Allison?
Yeah, I guess I don't want to get into another microclimate debate, but I think there's quite a bit of sand in Michigan, like the whole west side potentially. But we grew barley in Sutton's Bay, which isn't that far from us, but any peninsular area. And we have mostly experience with the Conlon, to be fair, as far as our own farming activity. It's just, I guess I would say that it went really well from 2014 all the way through 2017, 2016. In the beginning, it was almost easy. And then 2019 and 2020 were a bit more challenging, but I would say that we don't apply excessive nitrogen. The timing's pretty critical. We always just have made sure that it's all done, the fertilizer's done at planting. It's a real mistake if we have to come back after the seed goes in the ground.
One thing that's hard about trials is even the ESBN, you've got Conlon, which is really early. And so it ripped the first thing to ripen off. And then you have something like Genie and even Genesis that just stay green. And you can't, we harvest the trial all together. And so Conlon's probably been sitting out there a week drying down where Genie's still green as can be. And it's just not a fair comparison because the Conlon will just completely crumble. Whereas if you're a farmer, you've got one variety and you can manage it and harvest at the right time. So the plot data has got some disadvantages to it in that we got to wait till the late stuff comes in. Our farmers hate Genesis because it just doesn't, it stays green.
Takes a long time to mature, ripen.
Yeah, and the breeder previous to me, he really liked that stay green character. Jerry Frankowick, he put that into the material, and now I'm trying as quickly as I can to kick it out because the farmers hate it. Because it's like silage going through the combines. It's just tough on the machines.
Brooke, I have a suggestion for a research project if you need ideas. I'm sure you have lots of ideas, but we have a hard time convincing growers here in New York to harvest early enough to prevent sprouting. And I always say, look, once the plant is mature, if you can get it off, you should get it off. I just don't think anything good can happen by leaving it out there. But then they'll say to me, oh, but there's some tillers and I see some green seeds. And I'm like, how much do you think this really matters? How much with the green seeds in there, once they get it in and they do some drying, some low temperature drying, would there be a way you could seed a trial and then fake it and somehow like go out later and like put some seeds in later so that you actually purposefully get a mature stand with some green seeds, and then we could harvest it and bring it to the lab and actually like with a control and see like maybe 3%, 5% green seeds, maybe it's okay. We don't really know. I don't think we have enough data to really know how concerned they have to be about a few of these green seeds.
Yeah.
Why would you risk quality today? It's all about getting it out of the field. So I know exactly the individuals who you've had these conversations about before, but today it's the data suggests to get it off the field when it's get to this ripeness, and then hopefully it's dry. That's the key.
There's a grower in southern New Jersey. Oh, what's her name? Hillary or Aaron?
Hillary Burrell from Rabbit Hill Farms.
Yeah, and her family used to grow vegetables. They were vegetable growers, and they got into malt barley, opened up their own malt plant. And she treats that barley like it's vegetables. She's out there measuring moisture. She says I think it's close to harvest a couple times a day, and she's been pretty successful. But she treats it like they treated their vegetables.
But the Hillary's a good example. So they grow KWS Scala, which is a winter 2-row, very low protein, high extract, and Quest under low nitrogen. So it's like 10% barley, 10% protein Quest. But she says her Scala is very uneven in maturity. So it's very challenging to gauge when to harvest. And so I'd like to have some data to show that, 10% green, 5% green, what can we get away with? So I was like, I wonder if we could fake a trial where you had varied maturity, and then you could scatter those seeds and we could bring them to the lab and actually generate some best practice guidance. Like, I'd like to be able to prove I guess I'm looking for data to prove what Michael's suggesting, which is that it doesn't matter.
We could probably fairly easily just manipulate either by harvesting at a certain interval, or you can generate some of this green seeds by, say, driving over the plot at a certain stage to set it back a little bit. But then, because a lot of the green seeds sometimes we'll see either in like topographical diverse areas where there's variable maturity, or where the sprayer drives through the fields and knocks some down and then it grows back, right? Or and it's sensitive to the timing too. But if you hit it just like right after the stem elongation, it'll knock it down, but then it'll grow back, but it'll be like a week behind. So I would be interested too to see what the actual quality impact is of it, because I've seen it before and I was like, oh, that doesn't look good, but does it really matter? Do those seeds germinate once they're dried down? I don't know.
I don't know either.
One thing with that, we've noticed it's not always directly correlated, but one thing that would be interesting to see is how much dockage comes in when you have, I know one thing that causes us to take an extra day or two is it seems like the awns don't snap off in the combine as well when you have a barley above 14%. It's really hard to get your dockage off. And we went to the point of getting a brand new cylinder on the combine because we were having issues with it. A couple of years in particular, it was sort of a struggle with that.
What you could look at to measure the impact of the green is look at water uptake during steep, because Paul's they do pilot steeps because they do 80 malts at a time, but they all don't go in at the same time. There's 80 gram malts, and they all get dropped at different times, so that when they come out of the water at 8 o'clock Monday morning, they're all 43% moisture. So some are getting dropped around noon on Friday, and some are getting dropped at 3 in the morning on Saturday morning. So you could look at water uptake, because that's where I think the greens might have an impact, is that the maltster wants uniform water uptake, right? So if you got this green and thinner kernels in there, that might be an issue, just non-uniform water uptake. Or do you get more water sensitivity? So
I'll see if I can grow some samples for you. Let me think about that, Aaron.
Yeah, think about it. And I don't know, if you have to do it in the plots, or if we could fake it. Could you have 2 plots of the same variety side by side and just harvest one early and then mix them in different ratios? Could you make?
Yeah, I wouldn't do it in the small plot.
Yeah,
I could.
That's what I was thinking too. That way you could do different ratios.
Yeah, like 1%, 3%, 5%, 10%.
Yeah, you could get the green and the ripe.
My only challenge to what we're discussing is that a lot of this seems to be about it could be sorted out in the thins in particular, and then so we're only talking about whether or not those are going to germinate or not, right? Not necessarily the size and the growth, because I think that's where the we need data on when to harvest. And and so if there are green kernels when the data says to harvest, that's when we should harvest, and we should forego this conversation and determine when this needs to be harvested. Is it going to be moisture? Is it going to be other head drop? And what if it does get rained on? What is going to be our rules for harvest? But I'm going to sort of, I'm not not the most experienced, but I'm going to pull back and say, we're not going to trigger harvest by how many additional green kernels are beyond our ready to harvest dried kernels.
No,
I think it's
I understand what you're saying, Mike,
Yeah,
but actually
yeah.
I'm thinking about the reverse. I'm just actually trying to help some people, but if we could prove that seeing the green doesn't mean put the brakes on harvest. I'm trying to actually prove
Yeah.
the opposite. That
No, I understand
they
that.
see
but
the
that's
green
why-
and they don't want to do it. And I'm like, maybe it's okay.
but we
When
wanna
everything
know-
else is
right.
saying harvest, the moisture's saying harvest,
Yeah,
the weather, for God's sake, is saying harvest.
Oh, yeah, I see.
Yeah.
I see.
and-
You
and they-
want data to prove
That
that it's nominal if
Yes.
at best.
Yes.
That's
Yes.
fine. I
Yeah.
did as again only growing those few varieties. I'm particularly fond of varieties that have uniform plumpness, and I think that's where some of this that we're going back to phenotypical versus genotypical question mark. The data tells us it's genes, and me in the field says I want these big fat spring green peas. And that's what I'm looking for, pregnant pea. And if I don't get it, if I get an arrowhead, these ones up here, they're going to get sorted out. And Aaron knows the data suggests that I want more plumps at clean barley.
Yeah,
That's all we're looking for.
yeah, your ability to handle green too will depend on your farmer's infrastructure. Do they have the capability of drying that grain down? Some of our stuff we'll take off at 18%, not because we want to, but there's some late stuff in there that's just that wet. And but we have heat, and so a lot of growers don't have heat capabilities with their storage on the farm. And then if it's green, they're going to get all kinds of heating up. You have a lot of issues in that green.
But if they're going to be successful long term, Rich, at this point in New York,
It's an investment.
if they don't have heat, I don't want them to do it at all. Because look, they have to understand in fact, we've got to the point in New York in 5 years where I think we've settled for now that this is a boutique, malting barley is a boutique specialty crop.
Yeah.
There in New York, in Michigan too, right? We thought for a while there was some opportunity to scale, that there were some companies who had the ability to scale, but those companies have so far not been successful. And so this is boutique, and which means boutique growers who have to be well equipped. I just think drying it's at least in New York, you have to have heat drying. You have to.
Yeah, I could solve all your problems with the green kernels. Go to 6-row, because the 2 rows, I swear, if they get a little rain before harvest, they'll throw out new tillers. And and you're trying to harvest 2 crops out in the field sometimes. I eliminate those kind of varieties as quickly as I can for my breeding program. But the 6 rows, they headed uniformly, they dried down uniformly. There's a lot of history of breeding 6-row, and that's why it looks and performs the way it does versus 2-row, where there isn't 80 years of breeding on it. In North Dakota, I guess there's 50 now, but that's not a lot of time. And 2-row like a weed sometimes, it's throwing up spikes. It's like,
Rasmussen grows well in Michigan.
yeah, it's a 6-row. There's some advantages to them. Definitely the dry down and uniformity, the way they perform. We get complaints on the 2-rows with farmers trying to spray herbicide, or not herbicide, fungicide for scab, and and only half the crop is headed, and there's all these tillers still. When do I spray? Flip a coin. What's the average? It's very frustrating to them.
That's powdery mildew on my Rasmussen. Like I said, that's powdery mildew is my disease. So
Well, get yourself Odyssey.
I listened.
You know who called me up about growing LCS or Lima grain varieties? Blake Cooper called me up. What's today? Wednesday? Monday. He goes, I'm doing some work on the side for Lima grain. Can you grow some barleys for me? I go, sure. So we'll put a couple more Lima grain varieties if you guys want in the ESBN. There's one called Opera and one called Diablo.
Both non-GN. Both are non-GM.
Really? Well, so
Yes.
they're good dual market then.
Very good.
So
Lowest yielding variety in New York, Opera.
I'll have to look. I had it last year in my trials. I have to see.
Terrible.
Well, we do see the proof in the pudding here in Michigan. We get lucky with the LCS varieties.
Well, if I would have relied on North Dakota data, Genie and Odyssey would never be in the trials.
Right. Yeah. This is why this was the real success of the ESBN. To Rich and Paul's credit, Andrea's arm twisting and her magic, that it has been a tremendously successful
And
program.
Mike's free beer at the Barley Improvement Conference in San Diego. It's 2015, it's January 2015, and it happened quick. We got a trial that year. So it's been fun.
Also, like what you were talking about, Aaron, with low protein 6-row, I think Quest, we saw the same thing with Lacey here in Michigan. Based on quality alone, I could have told someone it was a 2-row and they would have believed me.
Except for the kernel size.
Well, depending on the year, yeah, we have poor plumps here in Michigan sometimes with 2 rows, so that kind of evens out in the wash there. But yeah, greater than 92% from what I recall, so not terrible.
Yeah,
I mean, then it's just a matter of getting the brewers over that fact that when they think of a thick 6-row, they think of one of Rich's 6 rows, right? They think of Celebration at 13.5%. And so it's a psychological barrier about brewing. Oh, 6-row, isn't that what they make Budweiser out? Well, we don't want to do that. There's a psychology going on with these craft brewers that we have to kind of beat through.
Just don't send it out too hot, not too high enzymes.
Right.
I've got quite a few semi-dwarf 6-rows that have the low protein gene from Pinnacle, and because there's a single gene that we put into we got it from Idaho that we put into Pinnacle and Genesis, and so it's 1.5 to 2 points lower in protein in our environment. In your environment, it's about 0.5 point lower in protein. So we have 6-rows with the low protein gene in them. So if people wanted them, and they're semi-dwarfs, so
I think the challenge.
We're going to use them for the pet food market.
The challenge. Sorry.
No, I was going to say, because the farmer can fertilize the hell out of it. And the pet food market pays as much as the malt barley market here in North Dakota. So
I don't think the challenge is one of breeding anymore. It's now seed supply. The varieties that we actually want to grow in New York, we can't even get the seed.
No, that's the
TP,
problem.
there's no certified seed. Quest, there's only one seed supplier, and it's only organic, untreated seed. It's just Albert Lee. And these are the varieties that people want. And we go to Seedway, and they say, it's just not enough. It's just not enough.
And where do they get their seed for Albert Lee? Southern Minnesota. That's how far that seed is coming.
Yeah.
That's the problem in the East is the infrastructure.
Yeah, we know the varieties we want. We can't get them. Syngenta said we're not interested. LCS, God bless them, they have been extremely supportive of developing areas of the U.S., right? Thoroughbred would not have brought Riverbend to where they are today if it wasn't for Violetta and Calypso, right? So, but they're the only ones. The other companies have not been as serious about supporting this. And it's just so frustrating. And so we have people saving their seed. I saw some Endeavor in New York after 4 years of bin run. There was so much, what is that stuff? The little black powdery heads.
Smut.
Smut. There was so much smut. It was unbelievable. And I'm like, I said, you have got to go back to some treated or certified seed here.
Yeah.
Hey, Rich, how about, I got a closing comment to throw out there, and that is, if pet food is as big of a market as beer, we all need to drink more beer. I think our priorities are lost here.
Yeah.
So,
pet food, the specs on the pet food, no protein spec. The Dawn spec is 4 parts per million, 4, because they're going to pearl it. So, and they're paying probably a quarter less. If a malt barley market, Mike, you got to cover your ears. I'm going to talk price. If malt barley is $4.50, the pet food market's like $4.25. It's no brainer. Yeah. So.
Yeah. Well, let's drink more beer.
Yeah. It's going to be interesting to see what happens this year with barley, because soybean prices finally came back up. Big time. So.
Yeah, that was one of the comments I saw. The most detailed comment on the barley production survey for Michigan was that you know, I can contract soybeans at this price. It's a big barrier for me to plant barley, and
Yeah.
I can't really argue with that.
That's what we're getting, you know? So, yeah. Okay,
Well,
Mike, done talking that P word.
The big guy, well, that's okay. It's my attorney's not here. So again, here's that Rasmussen and you see those evergreens in the right-hand corner. That is where
The deer.
my deluxe deer stand is with heat and a plexiglass windows just slide open. That they deer love barley. I got a really big 8-point buck this year out of that stand. So I'm going to keep growing barley. Looks like I got my recommendation too, which variety to grow. Appreciate it.
Well, thanks, Ryan, for the invitation. It was fun on a Friday afternoon, drinking Diet Coke. But-
Well, I got tea and my whiskey's gone, so it's probably time to go. Thank you everyone for being here. Next week, we'll have a guest host, Dr. Brooke Wilkie, who had to run. But we'll have a presentation from Mark Sorrells from Cornell, and he'll be talking mainly about Excelsior Gold and the breeding path to bring that to market, and what he has in the pipeline besides that. So that'll be really interesting, and hope to see everyone there.
Yeah, that'll be in the trial this year in the ESB Excelsior Gold.
Yeah, and another one of his experimentals like CU 198.
Yep, he's going to have two in there. So that's exciting to see that coming out of.
Is 198 the other one that he puts in? Because that one's good. They had more seed of Excelsior Gold of CU 31. They had more seed, more foundation, I guess, and that's why they went. But 198 has better malt quality.
Okay, well, that's good.
It's good to hear. Is that, I think it's facultative. He was saying he has a line that he's interested in that's facultative, but it might not be that one.
Planted in winter. Or
No, he's talking about Lightning, that Pat Hayes. They're very excited in New York all of a sudden about Lightning, which is a Pat Hayes recent facultative release. But it's based on very limited malt quality data, very limited. So Mark gets very excited very quickly, but they have very limited data.
Gotcha. All right. Well, you know, maybe I'll limit my exuberance then.
And it was much better in the winter. So at the end of the day, right, the facultative looked a lot better in the winter than in the spring. So really, it's a winter.
Yeah, on the surface, that's what I've seen too, is facultative varieties are neat, but they aren't quite as good as spring varieties or winter varieties on their own in those scenarios, right? I don't know. Anyway, well, it's
Thanks,
probably
Ryan.
time for us all to go. Thanks everybody for being here. Good talk.
Yeah, it's great having the maltsters on. Learn a lot from them. So.
All right, cheers everybody.
Bye, Allison.
Bye, thank you.
See you, Rye.
See ya.